The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers, laughter, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Hollywood's elite had gathered for one of the year's most exclusive parties, a night of glamour, gossip, and networking. Celebrities floated from corner to corner, photographers snapped candid shots, and the air buzzed with anticipation. In a quiet corner, somewhat removed from the chaos, sat Steven Seagal. Dressed in his signature black suit and dark sunglasses, he sipped his drink calmly, observing the party with that unmistakable aura of quiet confidence. He wasn't trying to impress anyone tonight. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. But not everyone noticed or respected that. Across the room, a brash, arrogant man known in certain circles for his ego bigger than his talent, spotted Steven. He smirked, sizing him up. In his mind, he thought, this is my chance to shine, to make a joke, humiliate the legend, and be remembered for it. Without hesitation, he weaved through the crowd, drink in hand, and approached Steven. Guests turned their heads, sensing something was about to happen. "Hey, aren't you?" the man started, his tone dripping with mockery, trailing off just enough to make the moment awkward. Steven didn't flinch. He lifted an eyebrow slightly, a faint smirk on his lips, and simply said, "Yes. And you are?" The man chuckled nervously, unbothered by the calm, almost chilling confidence in Steven's voice. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice but making sure everyone around could hear. "I just thought, maybe you could show us some moves, like in the movies. Or are those just tricks?" The remark drew a few stifled laughs from nearby guests, a few raised eyebrows. A tense energy began to ripple through the room. Steven's smirk didn't change. He didn't snap, didn't yell, didn't make a scene. Instead, he simply set his glass down, leaned back slightly, and studied the man. His calm, unshakable presence made it clear. He wasn't intimidated, and he wasn't impressed. And in that pause, the entire room felt it, a quiet but undeniable warning that this was not someone to be toyed with. Little did the arrogant man know, the night he thought would make him the center of attention was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. The arrogant man, fueled by ego and a cocktail of bravado, leaned closer to Steven, ignoring the subtle shift in the room's energy. A few guests had stopped mid-conversation, sensing the tension rising. Phones were subtly lifted, ready to capture what was about to happen. "Come on, aren't you going to show us some moves?" the man asked again, his voice louder this time, dripping with mockery. "I mean, we've all seen your movies. Surely the master of martial arts can put on a little display for us humble guests?" The room chuckled softly, but the laughs felt uneasy. Steven's gaze didn't waver. His dark eyes studied the man with a calm intensity that made some in the crowd shift nervously. There was no fear in Steven, only quiet observation, like a predator analyzing its prey. Steven finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, and measured. "Movies are one thing. Reality is another. And tonight, reality doesn't need to perform for anyone." The words carried weight. They weren't threatening, but there was an unmistakable edge, a sense that he was fully aware of the man's attempt to humiliate him, and he wasn't intimidated. The man laughed awkwardly, trying to regain his dominance. "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're just going to sit there and sip your drink. That's no fun. People want entertainment." Steven slowly raised his glass, as if to toast him politely. "I don't perform for ego," he said softly. "I respect people. I expect the same in return." A ripple of tension ran through the party. People were now recording, their curiosity and anticipation palpable. Whispers floated. "Wow, Steven Seagal doesn't look fazed at all." The man, now a bit flustered, smirked and decided to escalate further. "All right, if you won't do it for us, maybe you can tell us some stories about your action scenes. How about that? Bet it's not as exciting as you make it look." Again, Steven remained composed. He tilted his head slightly, as if humorously humoring the man. "Stories," he said, "don't need to be told to prove someone else's worth. But I will share one thing. Real strength is not in entertaining others. It's in knowing when to act and when to remain calm." The room went quiet. Even the soft music in the background seemed to fade, in comparison to the charged energy around them. Guests exchanged glances, realizing the man was trying to provoke someone far beyond his expectations. One young woman whispered to her friend, "Do you think he knows who Steven really is?" Steven's subtle calmness only drew more attention. People began pointing their phones discreetly. The arrogant man felt the shift. The power of the moment was slipping from him, and the audience he thought he would impress was now silently rooting for Steven. Have you ever seen someone try to embarrass a celebrity or someone bigger than them? Comment below and tell us which country or city you're watching this from. I love seeing our global community. The man's smirk faltered. He realized the partygoers weren't laughing at Steven. They were noticing the arrogance and disrespect of his own behavior. And in that moment, the first hint of doubt appeared on his face. Steven leaned back, hands folded, eyes unwavering. He didn't attack. He didn't shout. Yet everyone in the room could feel the weight of his presence. The message was clear. You can try, but some people are untouchable in their confidence and composure. Little did the man know, this first attempt at humiliation was only the beginning. The tension in the room was far from over, and the crowd was about to witness something no one expected. A lesson in respect, power, and restraint. The arrogant man, frustrated by Steven's calm demeanor, decided it was time to escalate. He stepped even closer, his voice now loud enough to carry across the room. Seriously, you're going to just sit there and sip your drink? No moves, no stories? Come on, give us something. Steven didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, dark eyes focused, and gave the faintest smirk, the kind that made some in the crowd feel a chill run down their spine. He was quiet, but his presence alone was more commanding than any raised voice or flashy gesture could ever be. Listen, buddy. The man sneered, leaning over Steven's table. I think it's cute that you're trying to act all calm, but maybe you should learn that some of us don't take being ignored very well. A hush fell over the guests. The soft murmur of conversation stopped. Phones were raised, recording every subtle movement. Even the music seemed to fade into the background as all eyes turned toward the growing confrontation. Steven set his drink down and leaned back in his chair, studying the man as if he were a minor annoyance rather than a real threat. Then, in a voice that was calm but carried unmistakable authority, he said, "You think intimidation works here? You've already embarrassed yourself, and if you think I need to prove anything to anyone, you're mistaken." The man's smirk faltered slightly. He clenched his jaw, feeling the room shifting against him. He had expected laughter, maybe some nervous chuckles, but instead he felt the weight of every eye on him, silently judging, silently warning. "You don't get it, do you?" The man hissed. "I don't scare that easily. You're going to regret treating me like I'm beneath you." Steven leaned forward just slightly, enough to make the man feel the intensity of his gaze. "Regret comes from choices," Steven said evenly. "And tonight, your choice is showing disrespect. You're welcome to keep making it, but don't expect me to participate in your little display of ego." The arrogant man's voice rose, now clearly frustrated. "You think you can just sit there and talk to me like that? I can make you the joke of the party right now. Everyone will laugh at you, not me." At that moment, a few guests, sensing the tension, began stepping closer, phones ready to capture whatever might happen. Steven's calmness didn't waver, but the subtle tension in the air was almost tangible. His posture was relaxed, yet there was a silent warning in the way he held himself. "You can try," Steven said slowly, his voice almost a whisper now, but somehow carrying across the room. "But remember this, real strength is not in making others look small. It's in knowing who you are and standing firm, even when someone tries to provoke you." The man laughed nervously, trying to hide the fear creeping into his ego. "Oh, come on, you're just bluffing." A hush fell again. Steven's smirk returned, subtle but unmistakable. "Bluffing?" he said. "I don't bluff. I don't need to, and everyone here already knows it." Guests shifted, murmuring among themselves. "Did he just? I can't believe he's staying calm." Phones were raised, and the first shaky video streams began circulating online. A few whispered, "You'd never want to mess with him." The man's hand twitched slightly toward his drink, an unconscious attempt to regain confidence. But every movement was met with Steven's unblinking stare, calm, calculated, and almost predatory in its focus. At that moment, a woman whispered from the crowd, "I think he's trying to intimidate Steven Seagal. But it's not working." Steven, ever composed, leaned back and folded his hands over his stomach. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell, but every word, every glance, radiated power. The arrogant man's bravado was collapsing, piece by piece, under the quiet intensity of Steven's presence. What would you do if you saw someone trying to humiliate a celebrity like this? Would you step in or stay silent? Comment below and don't forget to tell us which city or country you're watching from. The man's face was red now, a mix of frustration, embarrassment, and disbelief. The room was silently rallying around Steven, captivated by the calm, commanding aura that made it clear. He was in control, even without raising a hand. Steven finally spoke, low and measured, as if addressing the entire room at once. Tonight, no one will be humiliated here, except the one who doesn't understand respect. The words were like a quiet thunderclap. The arrogant man froze, realizing too late that he had misjudged the situation entirely. The whispers in the room turned into quiet gasps. Phones were recording every second. People were leaning forward, anticipating what would happen next. The first attempt at humiliation had completely backfired, and everyone present knew the night was far from over. The man had challenged the wrong person, a living legend, someone who had faced far greater threats with far greater composure. And the real lesson? It wasn't over until Steven Seagal chose it to be. The room was tense, like the calm before a storm. The arrogant man had tried everything, mocking, sneering, raising his voice, but Steven Seagal had remained calm, unshaken, almost untouchable. Every guest could feel it. Something extraordinary was happening, something that defied their expectations. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Wait, is that Steven Seagal?" one guest murmured. Another leaned over to a friend, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think it is." "That's him." The arrogant man, still attempting to maintain his composure, glanced around nervously. "Who's talking?" he demanded, clearly unsure of what was happening. But even as he tried to assert control, he noticed the subtle shift in the room. Eyes were no longer laughing at him, they were watching him, judging him, silently calling out his arrogance. A young man from across the room, unable to contain himself, spoke up loud enough for a few others to hear. "Hey, that's Steven Seagal, the action legend, the martial arts master." The crowd erupted in murmurs and low gasps. People nudged each other, pointing their phones, whispering, and exchanging shocked glances. "I can't believe it. He's Steven Seagal. No way. He's been sitting here this whole time?" The arrogant man froze. His bravado faltered completely as the realization sank in. He had been trying to humiliate a man whose reputation preceded him, a man who had faced far greater challenges than a drunk partygoer with an inflated ego. Steven, as always, remained calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat, and didn't make a scene. He simply observed the growing recognition around him with a faint, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that made it clear. He could have reacted in countless ways, but he chose patience, composure, and dignity over confrontation. The room's energy shifted dramatically. Where tension and fear had coexisted, now admiration and awe began to dominate. Phones were raised, cameras clicked, and small groups huddled to whisper excitedly. Some guests, who had never met Steven personally, now realized just how serious this situation had become. The arrogant man, desperate to reclaim the attention he thought he deserved, tried to speak. "Hey, come on, I was just joking." A few chuckles arose from the crowd, but they weren't in his favor. They were nervous, awkward, unsure whether to support him or just watch. Even his allies seemed hesitant. They could see the man he had been mocking was far more formidable than anyone at the party had expected. One of the guests, a longtime friend of Steven's, decided to step in. "Sir," he said politely but firmly, "maybe you should stop embarrassing yourself." The arrogant man's face turned red. He opened his mouth to respond, but Steven finally chose to speak, calm, measured, and unmistakably authoritative. "Respect is earned," Steven said, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "And it cannot be demanded, mocked, or forced. Tonight, someone tried to test that lesson, and everyone here has seen the result." The crowd fell silent. Every eye was on Steven now. Even those who hadn't recognized him before were leaning in, feeling the weight of his presence. It wasn't just that he was famous, it was that his composure, confidence, and aura of authority made it clear. This was someone who had mastered himself long before he had mastered anyone else. The arrogant man's hands trembled slightly, whether from embarrassment, fear, or frustration, no one could tell. The whispers grew louder. "I think he underestimated him. He didn't know who he was dealing with." Steven's gaze met the man's. Calm, unblinking, almost hypnotic. And in that gaze was a silent warning. The game he had started would not end on his terms. Not tonight. Not ever. The crowd began to murmur in excitement. Phones clicked, videos were recorded, and live streams began to circulate. People were realizing they were witnessing something rare. A display of restraint, composure, and quiet power from a man who could have easily taken the spotlight by force, yet chose wisdom over showmanship. The arrogant man stepped back, finally realizing the magnitude of what he had done. The whispers were now unanimous. He had challenged someone far beyond his reckoning. And while Steven had not struck, not shouted, not humiliated him in return, the room itself seemed to side with the legendary martial artist. It was the kind of recognition that changes the course of a moment, transforms tension into awe, and sets the stage for the ultimate showdown. Everyone in the room now understood the man they had tried to mock was no ordinary celebrity. He was Steven Seagal, and he was a force that commanded respect, even without a single blow. And as the crowd's whispers swelled into quiet applause, a thought rippled through the room. This confrontation wasn't over. The arrogant man still had a choice: continue his foolishness or accept the lesson. Little did he know, the true climax of the night was about to unfold, one that would leave the entire party stunned and remind everyone what it really meant to underestimate Steven Seagal. The party had fallen into an almost surreal quiet, where there had once been music, laughter, and idle chatter. Now there was only the soft hum of whispered speculation and the subtle clicking of phones recording the scene. Everyone in the room had their eyes on Steven Seagal. The arrogant man, who had come to mock and humiliate, now realized he was completely outmatched not by force, but by the quiet authority of the legend before him. Steven leaned back in his chair for a moment, taking a measured breath. He didn't need theatrics. He didn't need shouting or any physical display. Every muscle in his body was relaxed, yet there was an unmistakable tension, a readiness that made it clear. He was entirely in control. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, even, but it carried across the room like a calm but powerful wave. You came here thinking it was funny to humiliate someone. You thought disrespect would make you memorable, but all it has done is reveal your own weakness. The arrogant man's face flushed red. Weakness? I'm not weak. I was just joking, trying to have fun. Steven's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm, deliberate. There is no humor in disrespect. There is no fun in making others feel small to inflate your own ego. Real strength, he said, pausing to let the words settle over the crowd, is knowing who you are and not needing to prove it to anyone. The whispers grew louder. Some of the guests were shaking their heads, realizing the truth of Steven's words. Phones captured every moment, live streams circulating footage of the confrontation in real time. The arrogant man fumbled, trying to interject, but Steven held up a hand. Let me be very clear, Steven continued. You tried to humiliate me, to make yourself appear larger. But respect is not something you take. Respect is something you earn, and you have shown that you have none. Not here, not tonight. The room was silent now, not out of fear, but out of awe. People who had only recognized him moments ago now understood why Steven Seagal was legendary. He didn't need to prove anything physically. The power in the room was palpable because of the way he carried himself, calm, composed, and completely in command. The arrogant man, desperate to salvage some semblance of dignity, took a step forward. You think you're better than me just because you're famous? Steven's gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink. Every person watching could feel it. The controlled intensity of a man who had faced danger, conflict, and life-or-death situations countless times, and had never lost his composure. I am not better than anyone, Steven said evenly, but I know what it means to have discipline, integrity, and respect. And tonight, you have shown none of those. That is where the difference lies. A few guests murmured in agreement. Phones captured every word, every pause, every subtle movement of Steven's hands as he leaned slightly forward. The arrogant man's mouth opened, then closed. He realized there was no comeback that could match the calm authority radiating from Steven. Look around you, Steven said, his voice now carrying more weight. Everyone here sees what you tried to do, and everyone here knows that no amount of arrogance, shouting, or mockery can outweigh dignity and self-control. A small ripple of applause broke out among the crowd. Others cheered quietly, still recording. The arrogant man's confidence crumbled entirely. For the first time that evening, he realized he had miscalculated everything: the room, the crowd, and most importantly, the man he had tried to humiliate. Steven leaned back slightly, letting the words sink in. "Tonight," he said, "isn't about me. It's about a simple truth. True strength is not in aggression. True strength is in knowing yourself, controlling your actions, and demanding respect through your character, not through fear or intimidation." The arrogant man, now humbled and visibly shaken, looked down. There was no laughter from the crowd now, only quiet acknowledgement of Steven's power. And it was a power that required no violence, no threat, no dramatics, only composure, intelligence, and moral authority. Steven glanced at the guests, his voice softening but still commanding attention. "Remember this, not just tonight, but always. Ego is temporary, respect is permanent, and anyone who tries to take it from others will always reveal their own weakness." The room erupted into murmurs of admiration, applause, and quiet cheering. The arrogant man muttered something inaudible and stepped back, fully aware that his attempt to humiliate had completely failed. Steven's calm dominance had not only neutralized the threat but turned the entire party into a moment of learning, humility, and awe. Have you ever seen someone stay calm while being disrespected and completely turn the situation around? Comment below and type "respect" if you believe true strength comes from composure. As the applause grew louder, the atmosphere shifted completely. Steven Seagal had transformed a potentially humiliating encounter into a masterclass in control, authority, and respect. The arrogant man would leave the party tonight with one clear lesson: some people are untouchable not because of their fame, but because of the power of their character. And for everyone else witnessing it, they had just seen a moment that would be remembered long after the night ended, a true lesson in dignity, restraint, and the quiet power of standing tall, under pressure. The room had fallen into a near reverent silence. Steven Seagal had spoken calm, firm, and commanding, and the arrogant man now stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat, apologize, or simply disappear. Every guest felt it. This was no ordinary confrontation. This was a demonstration of authority, power, and experience that could not be challenged lightly. But the night had one more revelation in store. A longtime friend of Steven, who had been observing from across the room, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "Everyone needs to understand something. Steven Seagal isn't just a celebrity. He's a martial arts master, a trained professional who has faced far more dangerous situations than this. And tonight, he's shown something even more impressive: restraint and composure." Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. Phones zoomed in. The live streams caught every second. The arrogant man finally looked around, realizing that he had underestimated not only Steven's presence but the weight of his reputation. Every corner of the room was now aware. This was a man who could have ended any confrontation in seconds, but he had chosen wisdom, patience, and respect over spectacle. A few guests, emboldened, approached the arrogant man cautiously. "You really shouldn't have done that," one said. "Do you see what just happened?" The man's ego, which had driven his actions just minutes ago, was now crumbling. His voice was barely audible. I didn't think." Steven, still calm, finally decided to break the silence with just a few words, directed not only at the man but at the entire party. "Let this be clear," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. "Strength is not measured by who can shout the loudest or make someone look small. Strength is knowing yourself and controlling your actions. And tonight, some of you have seen that in action." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, applause, and even a few cheers. The arrogant man's attempts at humiliation had completely backfired. He had come seeking to dominate, to draw attention to himself, and instead, the spotlight had completely shifted. It was now on Steven, but not in the way the man had expected. One guest whispered to another, "I can't believe he didn't even raise a hand. That's insane." The calmness, the confidence, he's untouchable. The arrogant man, humiliated in front of the entire party, tried to mutter an apology, but Steven simply raised a hand in acknowledgement and shook his head slightly. He didn't gloat, he didn't mock, and he didn't humiliate. The lesson had already been delivered, and it was clear to everyone present. True power, Steven said softly, isn't shown through force or arrogance. It's shown through composure, integrity, and respect. Remember that, not just tonight, but always. Ivid. The crowd erupted into applause once more. Phones continued to capture every second. Guests shared excitedly with each other, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a confrontation, but a demonstration of moral and personal strength. The arrogant man, now completely humbled, slowly stepped back. His face was pale, his posture defeated. The whispers around him made it clear. He had overestimated his own confidence and underestimated the man he had challenged. He had thought the encounter would make him the center of attention, the funny hero of the party. Instead, he had become a cautionary example of what happens when ego meets experience and discipline. Steven glanced around the room, making eye contact with several guests. Respect, he said quietly, is earned, not demanded. Humility is strength, and arrogance, he gestured slightly toward the man, will always reveal its own weakness. The atmosphere shifted completely. Where tension had once been thick, now there was admiration, awe, and a deep sense of lesson learned. People began chatting quietly, phones capturing commentary, live streaming moments of the confrontation. If you've ever seen someone stay calm under pressure and completely turn the situation around, type respect in the comments. Have you or someone you know handled a confrontation like this? Share your story below. Even Steven's closest friends in the room were nodding subtly, impressed by the restraint and authority he had displayed. He hadn't needed to raise a hand or make a show of his skills. The power of his presence, experience, and moral authority had been more than enough to command respect from everyone in the room. The arrogant man quietly left the immediate area, avoiding eye contact. The crowd resumed conversation, but the energy in the room had changed forever. Every person present now carried with them a memory of a moment that went far beyond Hollywood gossip or celebrity antics. They had witnessed a lesson in integrity, patience, and quiet power, all embodied by a man who could have dominated physically, but chose to dominate with character. And as the night carried on, the whispers grew into a consensus. The arrogant man had been humbled. Steven Seagal had won the night not through spectacle or aggression, but through composure, authority, and unwavering respect. The story of what had happened would not stay confined to the room. Phones were already buzzing with notifications as clips circulated online, and social media posts began spreading the tale. People around the world would soon see what it meant to truly handle arrogance with dignity. Steven Seagal, ever calm, quietly returned to sipping his drink. The room watched, not out of fear, but out of admiration. He hadn't needed to gloat. He hadn't needed to prove anything. The lesson had been delivered loud and clear through presence, restraint, and respect. And in that moment, it was undeniable. The man everyone had underestimated was, in fact, untouchable in his composure, unmatched in his authority, and unstoppable in his quiet strength. The party slowly resumed its rhythm, but nothing felt the same. The music played softly in the background, but the energy in the room had shifted entirely. Where there had once been casual laughter and idle chatter, there was now a hum of admiration, awe, and quiet respect. Every guest carried the weight of what they had just witnessed, a confrontation that could have turned ugly, handled instead with extraordinary composure and authority. Steven Seagal returned to his corner, sipping his drink calmly. He made no show, no dramatic gesture, no boastful smile. Yet the impact of his presence lingered in every corner of the room. The arrogant man, once loud and brash, had quietly stepped away, his ego visibly deflated. He moved through the party like a shadow, acutely aware that he had miscalculated the situation entirely. Guests whispered among themselves, replaying the scene over and over. "Did you see that?" someone asked, pointing subtly to their phone screen. He didn't even touch him, but you could feel the power in the room. A young woman nodded, eyes wide. "I've never seen someone handle disrespect like that before. It was incredible. He didn't need to fight to win. He just won with composure." Phones were still raised, videos being posted online in real time. Clips of the confrontation began to circulate immediately, spreading across social media platforms. Within hours, the story was trending. Headlines popped up. Steven Seagal shows true strength at Hollywood party. and legendary martial artist humiliates arrogant guest without lifting a hand. The narrative was simple but powerful. Respect, composure, and restraint had triumphed over arrogance and ego. People around the world were captivated. Fans shared their admiration. Strangers commented on the power of handling conflict wisely, and clips began accumulating millions of views within a single day. Even the party's organizers acknowledged what had happened. They quietly approached Steven, thanking him for maintaining grace under pressure and for demonstrating a lesson everyone could take to heart. Steven only nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. To him, it wasn't about fame, ego, or proving anything. It was about showing the truth. The strongest people are often those who act with patience and integrity, not force. Meanwhile, the arrogant man's reputation suffered an instant blow. Clips of his failed attempt at humiliation went viral, accompanied by captions pointing out the lesson he had inadvertently taught. Arrogance without understanding is a recipe for public embarrassment. He had underestimated his target, and the crowd and eventually the world had noticed. The story didn't just stay online. It sparked conversations about character, humility, and respect. Fans commented on Steven's restraint, discussing how the true strength of a person could be measured not by their ability to dominate, but by their ability to remain composed in the face of provocation. Even months later, people referenced the incident in interviews, social media posts, and casual conversations. The lesson had become a global talking point. It wasn't just a Hollywood anecdote. It was a reminder that dignity and composure can have more impact than anger or aggression. Steven himself didn't comment publicly in detail. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken louder than words. The world had witnessed a masterclass in handling disrespect, and the message resonated far beyond that party. True power is silent, patient, and measured. As the evening wound down, Steven left the party quietly, leaving a room still buzzing with conversation. People spoke of him with newfound admiration, retelling the story over and over. The arrogant man had been humbled, but the world had learned something far more important. The way to command respect is through character, not confrontation. If you believe no one should be underestimated, and that true strength comes from patience and respect, type respect in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to see that dignity always wins. The night became a legend in its own right, not because of fame or celebrity, but because of the quiet, undeniable authority of Steven Seagal. He had faced arrogance with calmness, diffused tension without violence, and left everyone in awe of his composure. By the next morning, videos of the incident were everywhere. Millions of people had watched, commented, and shared their admiration. Media outlets praised Steven's restraint, highlighting that sometimes the most powerful actions are those taken with patience and wisdom, not aggression. The arrogant man, meanwhile, learned a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. The world had seen him for what he was: arrogant, impulsive, and completely outmatched, and the memory of that night would follow him for a long time. And as for Steven Seagal, he had done what he always had, led by example. His calm authority, moral clarity, and quiet power had made an unforgettable impression on everyone present. The story would live on, inspiring viewers worldwide to handle conflict with composure, dignity, and respect, proving, once and for all, that true strength is not shown in force, but in character.